Diana, and Natalina. Welcome to the pod.
Everybody, welcome to episode 1 of the podcast starring myself, Natalina, and the lovely and talented Miss Diana. Diana, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Had a good weekend.
I did too. In fact, my weekend was completely uneventful, so that's what made it great. One of the first uneventful weekends I've had in a very long time.
That's right. You've been dealing with your father and all that. How's he doing?
He's doing a lot better. He should be coming home maybe in about a week. So everybody's just kind of getting ready for him to come home and letting him get acclimated to being back after being, in the hospital and away for, almost 2 months now. So, but he's doing a lot better. He's every day it's kind of a new thing. So we're excited.
Good to hear.
And very hopeful. So if anyone out there listening is wondering what is going on here, this isn't beyond extraordinary. Like, what's happening here? Well, I will tell you. This is a brand new podcast that is just being launched. It's something that's been in the works and in discussion for a very long time. In fact, some of you, if you listen to my show Beyond Extraordinary, may remember that Diana and I did a show together around Christmas time, I think it was.
It was right before Christmas.
Right, yeah, because we talked all about Christmas during the show. Yeah. And at that time, even, we were talking about doing a podcast together, and it's just been a lot of different things going on in both of our lives, and we're only just getting to it now. So we're really excited, and I'll tell you a little bit about why we're calling it the podcast. And, well, for one, obvious reasons, because it's a podcast. And two, because ever since Diana and I met, it's one of those wonderful stories where, people meet on, don't cue the romantic music here, but we met, we found out we had a lot in common. We kind of, a lot of our opinions and stuff sort of tracked at the same place, and we would sort of maybe every once in a while finish each other's thoughts, and so we would just jokingly say that we were two peas in a pod. Get it? So clever. So I guess what we want to do with this show is basically just take some of the conversations that we have had privately and just record them and bring them public. And we just thought that maybe for a number of reasons it might be interesting to the listening audience out there. What do you think, Diana? What is the podcast?
Well, the podcast is going to be developed, I'm sure. I know. Yeah. Right now, the podcast is just time to have a little bit of fun, a little bit of news, a little bit of culture, a whole lot of tossing ideas around and brainstorming and brain battling and seeing what comes out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think one of the really good things about it is because you and I talk so frequently and we discuss so many different topics, just a wide range of topics that, sometimes it can get to a point where it's like, I would love to hear what other people think about these things that we are going on and on about, and opening it up to a forum where people can actually be a part of hearing what we're talking about. In some ways it kind of almost maybe keep us accountable. Maybe we get going on a topic that we just really think we're on the right track and we're self-congratulatory, high-fiving each other, and if maybe the audience out there will be like, what are these girls talking about? So I think that's a big part of it too. So one thing that I think we're going to aim to do on this show is talk about things that maybe some people sometimes might be a little intimidated to discuss. maybe the kinds of conversations people generally only have in the privacy of their own homes, in the privacy of their own emails or private messages. And I think we're going to endeavor to take those kinds of conversations in a little bit more public way, just because I think, why try to stifle that kind of dialogue? Don't you think, Diana? I mean, it's silly for us to be afraid of being judged for the kind of conversations that I think everyone has.
Yeah, it has to be. I mean, people, even if they don't talk about it, people have to have curiosity about a lot of these topics. And I think that Christians especially tend to shy away from certain things just out of tradition or who knows why. So, I think that it's important to discuss everything. All the topics should be on the table. When we start having areas you can't talk about, those are the areas where they grow a seed of something that can turn into, a seed that grows into something that didn't even need to be a problem, that becomes an issue because it hasn't been discussed. It's not laid out on the table. It's taboo, and then a taboo thing becomes even more taboo, and then you're passing on a taboo that has no real meaning. Mm-hmm. And it can be detrimental, especially to kids, young adults.
Yeah, I think that can happen, and I think we see it a lot just in the circles in which we run where, somebody takes on what could be considered a controversial topic, and people don't know what to do with it, and they get scared, and they have visceral reactions to it without even really hearing what the other side has to say, and so I think it's good to do, and of course because we are such hard-hitting journalists and and great thinkers of our time, and because we want to be taken seriously not only as Christians, not only as podcasters, but also as women, I think we should just jump right into our first topic, which is the top 10 dreamiest apologists / biblical researchers.
Oh dear.
Hey, calm down, Dr. Heiser. You made the list. No, I don't think we're going to be doing discussions like that.
I think that's a bad idea on a lot of levels.
You know how these guys can be. Then all of a sudden it's a competition. Yeah. Maybe I can make the list on the next podcast. So, no, I think we're going to try to keep it a little less in that vein. But one thing that we do want to do to start this show is we independently have gathered some articles that have come out in recent days, and we decided we're just going to each present the article to one another, and maybe if we can have a conversation about them. And because I'm so generous, and I do a lot of talking just in my own podcast, I'm going to let Diana kick it off. Diana, what is your first article you're bringing to the table?
Okay. Well, my first choice for this evening came, I don't even know how I found this, but I ran across this headline. Now tell me if you would not have clicked on this. The headline is, Naughty Nuns, Flatulent Monks, and Other Surprises of Sacred Medieval Manuscripts.
I would have clicked on that so fast before I even finished reading it.
This article was found on Collectors Weekly.
Okay.
And basically it's a pretty long article, so obviously I'm not going to read it all, but there are some sections here, and what it is talking about medieval manuscripts that the monks used to, and that was their job. They transcribed whatever, not only just sacred texts, but whatever texts they had. Now, I learned a new word today, and the word is marginalia. Do you know what that is?
Nope.
Well, marginalia apparently is quite known for medieval scholars. It is little pictures and drawings that are found in the margins of these documents that were handmade and hand transcribed by artisans and monks and scribes because they didn't have a printing press yet. These were, I think it was the 12th and 13th century that these were quite popular, and so these books would be made for readings in church, or for really rich people would have them they would order them and have them beautifully illustrated. So, and it's just interesting, the art that's on these. So I'll read a little bit of this.
Yeah.
Flipping through an illustrated manuscript from the 13th century, you'd be forgiven for thinking that Jesus loved a good fart joke. That's because the margins of these handmade devotional books were filled with imagery depicting everything from scatological humor to mythological beasts to sexually explicit satire. Though we may still get a kick out of poop jokes, we aren't used to seeing them visualized in such lurid detail, and certainly not in holy books. But in medieval Europe, before books were mass-produced and reading became a pastime for plebs, these lavish manuscripts were all the rage, if you could afford them. The educated elite hired artisans to craft these exquisitely detailed religious texts surrounded by all manner of illustrated commentary known today as marginalia.
That's so fascinating.
Yeah. Caitlin Manning is an associate at the B&L Rutenberg Rare Books and Manuscripts, says part of the reason why modern viewers are so captivated by marginalia is because we expect this era to be conservative when compared to our own society. For example, few Monty Python fans realize that the comedy group's silly animations are direct references to artwork in illuminated manuscripts. Illuminated simply means decorated with gold or silver foil. I think it's such a shock when you have this idea in your head of what medieval society was like, says Manning, and then you see these bizarre images that make you question your assumptions. The wild mixture of illustrations challenges our contemporary need to compartmentalize topics like sex, religion, humor, and mythology.
What? So these are images that have just been gathered from previous manuscripts that people have found through the ages, and they've just compiled them. And
yeah, they're fascinating. I just sent you the link so you can look at them now. I mean, they're so funny. They're like, for instance, let's see. Here's an image of an ogre shooting an arrow into another creature's butt who is farting. This is like at the bottom of a manuscript. And then there's, I mean, they're crazy. You got to look at them. I sent you the link there. You can see them. We'll have to post it for people.
Yeah, I like this one that is perfectly sane, where there is seems to be a battle going on, and there's a rabbit with a dog riding on its shoulders, holding a shield and a spear, and the battle is happening against a snail with a man's head with a rabbit riding its back.
Yes.
So, and it looks like this is all taking place on a dragon's tail. So, I mean, I think it probably got a little lonely and boring in these monasteries. And when you're just transcribing these great words via candlelight, I mean, I guess every once in a while you just have to release some of that crazy that's built up, and you come up with something like this.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. There's some concluding sentences here that I like. It says, asking about why they use such crude imagery and why excrement was so prevalent. And it says that, you know, from a modern perspective, it can be difficult to understand how sacred text and body images could exist side by side, especially given our preconceived notions about the uptight religious fervor of the age. But I think marginalia helps us recognize that medieval society was as complex as our own. While it might be tough for us to grasp the meaning behind such seemingly opposite imagery drawn together on a page, perhaps for the medieval viewer, the conflict wasn't quite so black and white.
That's fascinating. And, you know, it's good to know that these people that I think, like, when we envision the people who lived during those times, especially those, you know, they tended to be monks in monasteries and stuff. When we think about them, we think of, you know, these very solemn, very serious, very pious people. And judging by some of these drawings, they had a bit of a worldly sense of humor, I guess would be one way of saying it.
Yes. And it's nice to know, don't you think? I mean, good to know that they had some fun, too.
I would say so.
And the same kind of fun that, like, you know, our husbands have.
Right. Never let a good fart joke go to waste. Well, that is a fascinating story and really caught me off guard. I was not expecting that one at all. So leave it to you. I can't wait to hear what the next ones are. Let's see. Mine is going to take a decidedly different turn. Have you heard this story? It's been reported for a while now about the mysterious woman in black.
That's walking around everywhere?
Yeah.
I saw something about her.
Yeah, I was hearing it reported for quite a while, and for the longest time, all the stories that were coming out about it were really obscure, like, oh, there's this woman dressed all in black with a black veil, and she's just walking, down highways and through small towns and down interstates, and people instantly started speculating about what she could be doing. And I think it's a really interesting commentary on the way that the internet can create a story around something that doesn't at all resemble the reality of what's happening. So I started hearing stories about her, and initially it was just about how this woman in black was just walking around the country. And people started having sightings of her and posting their pictures on Facebook, Twitter, and what have you. The story started to evolve. I remember reading a story about how she was perhaps, because she has this long black gown and robes that she wears and this long black veil, that perhaps she was a Muslim. And so, of course, you have these people who are starting to get really freaked out, like, maybe she's the harbinger of some kind of doom, And then, on the other hand, there's this Twitter tweet that came out because this hashtag became really popular, hashtag woman in black. So people were tweeting whether or not they saw her, and they were tweeting what their speculations were. And one guy tweeted, "The woman in black has walked all over the country because God told her to. I hope she finds peace in whatever she's looking for. She is such an inspiration to us all." And I'm like, okay, but how? Like, what is she? She's walking, and she is dressed in what I would say inappropriate garb for this time of year. How is she inspiring you unless maybe you're like on a health kick or something, and you're like, gosh, I wish I had that kind of that kind of drive to do that much walking? I don't know. But so people were following her. They were pinning her on Google Maps. They were tweeting her. There was YouTube debates about the potential biblical implications of what she was up to. And it turns out that there is a legitimate story behind who she is, but it even still is a little strange. So the woman, she has been walking for over 1,000 miles. She walked from Alabama in all black clothing with a cane, and I believe it was that she walked all the way to West Virginia. And they were able to track down who this woman is, and a little bit of her story. Of course, whenever something like this happens, news media are following this person around, hounding them, and that type of thing. So this woman, her name is released, and I can't find where it says her name. But her last name is Poles, and apparently she's an Army veteran. She's a widow and a mother of 2. And she said that she was doing great, and all of a sudden she just decided to put on these weird robes and just start walking. I mean, that's what people know about her. The VA calls her a disabled veteran that may have some sort of PTSD. Apparently, she has shaved her head. People who have tried to approach her, she said, "I wish people would just mind their own business and leave me alone." People have tried to, it's crazy, Diana. There's videos out there of people lining the streets waiting for her because they've been following this on Google Maps, and so they know she's going to be coming through their area, and they're lining the streets just applauding for her as she walks by. And I'm like, I guess I just don't. I mean, it's interesting, but why are they so excited about this? What do you think it is that appeals to people about this, to where they would feel the need to go out and make a hero out of this woman who, from all accounts, is mentally disturbed and just walking for no apparent reason?
It's a little Forrest Gumpy.
It kind of is. I thought of that too. And maybe.
And in that movie, everybody followed him. Remember how many people were at the end of when he finally decided to stop running?
Mm-hmm. That's true.
He had miles of people behind him. People are joiners. They're looking for a cause. They're looking for a leader, and anybody that's doing anything different seems like a leader to him, I guess.
I guess so. It's really strange. Those who know her, those who are related to her, I think her brother came forward and gave a little interview and talked about how she just seemed to kind of have recently had a snap and shaved her head and started wearing these black robes, and he says there's something going on with her. So really, it's actually quite sad.
Mm-hmm.
And someone said that they went and spoke to her, and she said a few words to them, and she was very articulate and appreciative. And one person said that she mentioned she was on a mission that has had something to do with faith and religion. And I think people heard those words and they just went nutty, and they're like, she is heralding the coming of the Messiah. It's weird, but people have said stuff like that. People have actually, the police said that there were people contacting the Pentagon wanting to know if she was some sort of a representative of an Islamic nation. And it's like, what? I guess. People
obviously don't have enough to do. Why am I so busy? I don't have time to call the Pentagon and ask about the woman in black.
I know. I mean, I guess to me it would be maybe one of those little slice of life stories that I would just hear as a blip on the radar and then disregard, but people are really excited about it. So I guess I just pray that whatever is going on with this woman, she finds some kind of peace, because, and maybe that very well may be why she's walking. She's looking to work something in her own life and her own mind out, and I would say people just leave her alone.
Really, I agree.
So that's my story. What else do you got?
Okay. Completely different thing. We are just like all over the board here.
Not surprising.
Yeah. Time magazine study on how millennials approach marriage. The idea behind it was that millennials have a whole different idea of the world, because it's a generation reared on technology, overwhelmed by choice, feedback, and constant information. It seems as though testing a marriage would be something that would sound good to them. So this study, this university put together a study, and what they did was, I think it was 1,000 people. Yeah, they asked 1,000 millennials, which is ages 24 to 32, I think. I can't see it here real fast, but I think it's 24 to 32. And they proposed 5 different marriage plans and asked them if they thought any of these sounded good. The first marriage plan was called the presidential. The vows last for another 4 years, but after 8 years, you can elect to choose a new partner. The beta was the union can be formalized or dissolved after a 2-year trial period. So you get together, after 2 years, you either go and have full-blown marriage or you separate. Then there's the traditional till death do us part. Divorce is illegalized, so you must stay together. Then there's the multiple partner, which is marriage can be with more than one person at the same time, each of whom fulfills a need in your life. And the 5th marriage proposal was called the real estate proposal. Marriage licenses are granted on 5, 7, 10, and 30-year terms, after which the marriage must be renegotiated to be extended. Now, which one of those do you think was the number one pick for the millennials?
I'm going to guess, knowing what a selfish generation that we live in, I'm going to guess it's the one where there's like a 2-year trial period.
Yes, 43% of them said that the 2-year trial period sounded the best to them. And the second most popular one was the real estate one, with the renegotiation after 5, 7, 10, or 30 years.
Wow.
Yes.
It's little wonder that we are in the state that we're in, man.
That's the consideration of our family life. And the death do us part, only 30% thought that was a good idea, which I guess is still, that's higher than I probably would have thought it was, to be honest with you.
That's true. But, it's sad because, call me crazy, but my idea of marriage is synonymous with till death do us part. I don't see any other potential options. Now, I'm not saying that people don't have different issues that come along, but it seems like till death do us part is the default option when you stand there and proclaim to be marrying someone. If something happens down the road, it is unfortunate, but it's not something that you tend to plan for,
Right. Yeah, a lot of these, and some of the comments from the people that were surveyed, one of the things was that they felt a marriage could be successful for a time and then just be over, and that was okay. I had a successful marriage for 7 years, but it's no longer successful, so I can move on to something else. They say that they're not afraid of commitment. They just want to make their commitment more informed, more wise. But overall, it's just kind of a redefinition of family and marriage and commitment and.
And I was going to ask, is there any addressing in this article about children and what consideration?
Nothing.
Really?
No. Children are not even mentioned, and I think that they were just trying to throw these 5 things at the wall and see what stuck. Because there was no mention of any of that. It was just, what do you think of marriage? And how do you think marriage could be better?
There's a new show, I want to say it's on TLC or something like that, and I can't remember the exact name of it, but I actually watched part of one episode one night, and it's,
Is it Satisfaction?
No, it's, it's, the premise of the show is that, 2 people agree to let their friends and family pick their wife or husband for them. And so the people fully agree to this concept, and then they don't meet until they are standing in front of the officiant who is going to proclaim them man and wife. And it was really fascinating. They had, in this particular episode, they had 3 different couples. And 2 of the couples seemed like, their family and their friends did a really good job of picking their significant others. They really liked the person that they were going to marry and that type of thing. But then there was a 3rd couple where the guy was really into it. He thought the bride was beautiful, and he couldn't believe how he just really, struck the jackpot. And the bride was like, oh my gosh, oh no.
Wow.
But she went through with it, with the idea that, maybe this just won't last. And it's interesting because the sort of the hype about this show was that for ages previous to our current way of life, marriages went down like that. Family picked when you were betrothed, whether you liked it or not. And so they were saying, this is an experiment to see if we could ever go back to that. But the thing is, of course, in the times when betrothals were commonplace, there wasn't that get out of jail free card on the table.
Also, the whole thing about marriage in those times, and the reason that the parents did choose, was because a lot of it had to do with political alliances.
Right.
That was probably the biggest part of it, was keeping a family line, or keeping wealth, or making a treaty with a country, or conquering a country.
Right. They were more familial contracts.
Yeah.
And it wasn't because the families just thought that they could find you your perfect love match.
Right. Because if you weren't compatible with your wife, whatever, then that's what your concubines were for.
Right, right. And so this show tries to portray an element of that type of lifestyle, but it's for completely different reasons, and everybody is given the option to where, if at week 4 or month 4 or what have you, if you decide this isn't going to work out, then you get a divorce. And it's really kind of sad.
It is sad.
So there is, there's just things are just different. And I don't know. It's a weird world. Nothing is sacred.
That's for sure.
Well, my next article is going to jump into the world of transhumanism. Ooh. Ooh. And this is actually, it's a video I found on CNN, one of their video reports, but I'll try to paraphrase what it's about. It's the title of the thing is that a man claims he's a cyborg. And of course, not unlike farting nuns, these types of headlines grab a person's attention. If that person is me. So this guy, he had this antenna implanted in his skull, and he's an artist, and he's colorblind. And somehow he determined that if he had this antenna attached to his head, that he would be able to see colors. And he explains how I don't think he's in the United States, but he explains how he went from doctor to doctor. And of course, no doctor would do it for him, but eventually he found one who was willing to do the operation under the cloak of anonymity. He was going to do it, but you can't say I did it. And I can only guess that there was a lot of money exchanged.
Are we talking like rabbit ears here? Like
no, it looks almost as silly though. It's like this big. I'll put the video in the show notes, but it's like this big, pole, metal arcing pole that starts at the back of his head. Like if you feel the back of your head, and there's like that little indentation right at the back of your top of your skull. So it starts there, and then it comes up from his head, and then it goes forward. And so it almost looks, and then it kind of stops. Okay, so this is how I could describe it. You know those fish that you see?
Anglers.
Yeah, anglerfish. It's exactly what it looks like. It's this big thing that comes from the back of his head, and then it arcs forward, and it has like this little knobby thingamajig that comes like right in front of his forehead. And the interesting thing that it's implanted in his skull. Like it's not just on the surface. This baby is like drilled into his skull and permanently part of his body. And the interesting thing is he claims that he still can't see colors, but now he can hear colors. So he plays music on the piano, and he'll like play this little ditty, and he'll go, that was blue. And I know that some people do claim that they have auditory connections to color, but I don't quite understand how this crazy metallic contraption can make that happen for you. But regardless, he's got a girlfriend who also is a cyborg. Oh. And she has a thing attached to her that is like an antenna as well. But supposedly it helps her to feel vibrations deep in the earth, like deep earthquakes. And she uses this for dancing because she wanted to be more connected to the earth and the movements thereof, and it helps her to feel these different primal rhythms. It's really ridiculous, okay? Really hippy-dippy stuff. And then the news thing goes to a third person who he has chips implanted in each of his palms. And they're like little tiny RFID chips, but he has programmed them to where he can just wave his hand in front of his car and his car door unlocks, or wave his hand in front of his safe and his safe unlocks, and he considers it to be a security thing. And he actually markets and sells these things to people who willingly want to implant chips into the palms of their hands.
Well, if they shot webs, that'd be cool.
It would be. That would be a whole different story, and I wouldn't be speaking of it in such a lighthearted manner. I mean, practical, right? But the thing that struck me about this is so often when you talk about transhumanism and you talk about human upgrades through technology, you hear about things that are supposed to convince you that these are things that are going to take human beings to the next level of, quote, evolution. And this story struck me because all of the people featured had implants done that were completely ridiculous and pointless, and they were cumbersome. And I thought to myself, this is probably how human beings really are. We're not going to be like Ray Kurzweil's vision of, the next great superhuman, no, it's going to be people like, I want to put a big antenna on my head so so I can hear colors. But you know what I mean? Human beings are stupid, selfish, and driven to, do these kinds of lunatic ideas. So is the future going to be like the vision that people like Ray Kurzweil or Dr. Hugo de Garis envisions, where it's going to be these amazing advanced human cyborgs or these robots that are highly intelligent, or is it going to be a bunch of morons?
Okay. I'll tell you what it's going to be. We are going to have the Kurzweil stuff, and everybody else is going to be filming, DIY cyborgs in their reality shows in their garage on how to do, how to add this capability to your body. So it'll just be like body garage instead of, hot rod garage.
Right. People will be doing things like, changing their fingers into, paint weapons or whatever. Like stupid. Like, why would you do this to yourself? But I guess the future is now, people.
Yeah, just interchangeable things for your fingers. Forks, knives, spoons. You don't need to hold them anymore. You just turn your finger into a fork.
Right. That cumbersome human thing where we have to hold things is just a thing of the past.
Right.
So I just found it so fascinating because it was the headline that he claims he's a cyborg, and instantly I have these visions of like, ooh, he's got a red laser eye and all this stuff, and he's like highly advanced. No, he's got a stupid anglerfish antenna on his head, and he uses it to paint.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Mm-hmm. On that note, do you have another one?
Okay. This is a really, really long article, but the idea behind it is fascinating to me.
Okay.
It's also a trans article, but it's not a transhumanism, it's a transgender.
Oh.
So, this whole thing with fluid sexuality, or not sexuality really, it's fluid gender that we're talking about here. That fluid sexuality is a whole nother story.
Right.
But fluid gender is really running into some problems. It seems so easy that you can just tell everybody that they can just be what they want to be. Mm-hmm. But the feminists, the hardcore feminists, are really taking offense to trans women.
Uh-huh.
Because, now this article came from, I forgot where this article came from. Anyway, it's called, What is a Woman? The dispute between radical feminism and transgenderism. And basically what it's saying is that women have come so far to separate themselves from men that they don't feel that that a man can decide that they feel like a woman, because then, we'll just read this sentence because it sums it up. They say that if you can believe in trans women, that's men wanting to be women, then this view of gender is less of an identity than a caste position. Anyone born a man retains male privilege in society, even if he chooses to live as a woman and accept the correspondingly subordinate social position. In fact, that choice means that he can never understand what being a woman is really like. So he is continuing his male privilege by saying, I just want to be a woman. And so they have this huge conference getting together saying that they cannot accept these people as women because they don't know the struggle.
Wow. Well, maybe they will just all self-implode.
I think they're going to have to, because they keep running into these, it's that, you hate to say it, but it's true. It's the slippery slope. Mm-hmm. Because these are the things that pop up. So now all of a sudden anybody can decide what gender they want to be, but the feminists have said, we've been fighting for our freedom from male oppression since the 50s. And now some men are just going to say we want to be women. They're not down with the struggle.
Right.
They can't do this.
Well, it's interesting because I've heard in different circles. Are you hearing an echo?
I don't.
Okay, it's just me. I've heard in different circles that homosexual men, and this has been a struggle that's happened for a long time, but that homosexual men and homosexual women generally don't get along. And it's because they don't view each other's struggle as the same. Gay men tend to see gay women as a product of being man-haters, whereas gay men consider it like a birthright. It's something that they're born with. And so what you're saying is this whole different paradigm where these feminists don't like the idea of men transitioning to women, because then it is just another way that the man is keeping them down by trying to live their experience.
Right. That's exactly right.
Huh. Well,
I mean, isn't it fascinating? The complications of this. It was so easy when we were just born a man or a woman. That was so easy. Now we have all these shades of gray in between man and woman, and then goes on to cisgender and xgender and non-gender. Right? You can claim to be non-gender identified. And so we have this whole range now, and this range is causing some real problems. So you got to wonder why we left the just simple, I got an X chromosome, I got 2 X's, I'm a woman, I got an X and a Y, I'm a man. This seems really easy.
It does. And, when you think about the future, you wonder, is the future going to look like, are these groups going to self-implode? Because they are built on this idea where we're so oppressed, but in reality, they tend to be more about privilege. And so will they implode under the weight of their own search for not just equality, not just even privilege, but special status, as they branch off into their own little, LGBTQA, what have you, that each individual group wants to elevate themselves above, up the ladder over one another, and then the whole stack of cards just collapses? Or is the future going to look like everybody is just very androgynous? It all kind of culminates into this, well, if gender is fluid, then what need have we for all of these different labels? Eventually, maybe we should just all be genderless and then all just sleep with each other.
Well, you know what? That's probably what some people would like. But I don't know. I think that it will either implode under its own weight, or it's going to start looking so ridiculous to the youth that they're just going to laugh it off as a big joke, and we'll take a step back to some sort of traditional value.
Well, God willing, because, you hear stories now of, you and I were talking the other night about this little girl who transitioned into being a boy starting at like age 2 or 3. Mm-hmm. and their parents are being celebrated as like heroes of the trans community. Meanwhile, no one's talking about what the future implications for this child might be. No one's talking about the fact that children don't know what gender is, let alone which one they are. Really, beyond, very specific physical markers of what makes a boy and what makes a girl. If they're taught that they can choose, they're going to want to make a choice. And we were talking about that Matt Walsh article where he's saying, that if you walk into a preschool classroom and you ask that, how many little boys want to be a girl, X amount will raise their hand. How many little girls want to be a boy, X amount will raise their hand. And then you ask them how many want to be a dinosaur, and probably all of them will raise their hand.
Exactly.
Because kids can't make those kinds of decisions. And then, of course, the bigger point is it really a decision whether you're a boy or a girl? Or is it completely biologically set in stone?
And this is another thing that is going to implode on its own just asininity. Because as parents, we're supposed to train our children how to become successful adults. And we wrap them in bubble wrap and stick them on a bicycle because they can't choose to ride down the street without being, completely protected. And we teach them that they shouldn't touch fire. We make that choice for them. Mm-hmm. If we didn't make those choices, we'd be in jail. You go, you let your kid ride a bicycle without a helmet and you get a ticket. You don't give your kid a vaccination. You can't take them to school. You let your kid gets broken arm from falling out of a tree, and you're investigated by social services. But yet we let them make the decision on their gender.
Right. Yeah, it's so true. And you even hear these stories about how in grade schools, and I think this is mainly just in California and, some of the more progressive, quote, progressive states, where they're implementing genderless bathrooms in schools and things like this. Where is the line? It's getting erased. There is no line.
I just think people are going to rebel against it. I really do. I think that it's starting to become a real joke. I think they had made some headway at some point because, we have to deal with the homosexual issue. And they don't deserve to be ostracized from society. But this is the slippery slope that everybody talks about. Because now all of a sudden it's impossible. The permutations of sexual identity, gender identity, and sexual proclivity, the permutations of that is so insane that you would have to have, I don't know how many, I didn't do the math. I don't even know how many things exist in each category. But you'd end up having to have, a maze of bathrooms. Start here. What's your gender identity? Start that door. And then, take the door to you. And what is your sexual preference? And and then by the time you get to the end of the maze, you've found a bathroom that you can appreciate, I guess. I don't know. It's just insanity.
Yeah, because, and once again, the concept of privilege raises its head because on the subject of bathrooms, then there was that one story about a school where there was a child who identified as transgendered, and they just allowed this child to use the teacher's restroom.
Here. That's a local story for me.
Really?
Yeah.
And so, once again, what is that saying to all the other kids? It's not saying this kid is a freak. It's saying this kid is special. This kid gets to use the children's bathroom. Whatever came of that story?
Oh, they were upset because they didn't give this child the right to use the bathrooms that the other children used. They said that he was being, or he, she, I don't remember if it was a he that wanted to be a she or she, whatever. They were saying that he was being discriminated against because he was forced to use a different bathroom. Oh. And this child wanted to use the bathroom of his choice of gender that day. And the parents of the cisgenders, those evil cisgenders, had a problem with it.
Right. because I'm guessing it probably logically follows that this was a boy who thought who identified as a girl.
It was a boy who wanted to be a girl.
Right. And
I can't remember. I can't
most normal parents of little girls probably don't relish the idea of a little boy coming in and going to the bathroom with their little girls.
Exactly.
What a mess. Well, that's interesting, and I think we'll keep an eye on that because that's a conversation you and I have quite frequently, and it's a pretty big issue. And I don't want anyone to confuse it with, gay bashing or anything like that. It's not like that. I happen to have a lot of compassion for people who are struggling with their sexuality and that type of thing, and I think that Christians tend to come down pretty hard on people who probably need love and compassion all the more. And rather than getting that, they're getting ostracized. But certainly I think that the question of gender identity is something entirely different.
Yeah, I agree. It's not an issue of sexuality at all. I think you and I have very similar opinions on that. But yeah, no, the gender identity thing is just, it's insane.
It really is. So we'll go to one more story, I think, and then we'll get on to the real news.
Woohoo!
My last story is something that I've actually looked into previously, but it was just, there was an interview on the Huffington Post, and the headline is, "What Seventh-day Adventists Get Right That Lengthens Their Life Expectancy?" Ooh. And now, Seventh-day Adventists, of course, are branch of, quote, Christianity. There's a lot of discussion on whether or not they are a cult or what have you, but rather than getting into all of the specifics of what SDA believes, the point of this story is that one of the things that they hold to be very high of value to themselves is to have a plant-based diet. So not unlike Mormons, they eschew all alcohol, all nicotine, all caffeine-based items, but they take it a step further, and they generally, as a rule, don't eat meat. They're largely vegetarians. If they do eat meat, it's very sparingly and probably like chicken and fish. And so the point of the article is that there's something to this, that on average, Seventh-day Adventists live an average of 10 years longer than the American life expectancy of about 79 years. So the question is, what is the overarching reason for this? Is it their plant-based diet? And the Seventh-day Adventists would say that that's part of it, but they also say that they have a network that reinforces right behavior. They take their Sabbath seriously, which they say decompresses stress, and that type of thing. They have cultural activities specifically designed to manage stress. And so whether or not people agree with the belief systems of the Seventh-day Adventists, I think they might be onto something in that they seemingly have tapped into something that legitimately works. This researcher named Dan Buettner, I will say the pronunciation is, he spent years researching parts of the world where people live on average much longer than the average person. And what he discovered is that pretty universally, wherever he goes in the world, it's Seventh-day Adventists who tend to live an average of 10 years longer than most people. So I think as Christians, a lot of times we kind of adopt this belief of, you can't take my guns, and I'm going to eat a cow tomorrow, and hey, I like hamburgers. I'm certainly not standing on a pulpit here, but is it necessarily a virtue the way some people tend, that the animals have been given to us for our use and for our eating and this type of thing, or is the better way to eat a more plant-based diet? And is that the way human beings were meant to eat? It begs the question of, and there's biblical precedent for that, actually, that human beings weren't given meat to eat until after the flood.
Mm.
And, of course, we start seeing biblical lifespans going down at exactly that point, right? So what do you think? Is that just a bunch of hype, or, is there something to it?
Well, I mean, it sounds like there's something to it. My gut tells me that the stress management has a lot more to do with it than the diet.
Mm-hmm.
Because, man, there are just so many moving pieces to that whole regimen. I mean, you can't just say that the meat eating is what does it. The stress is huge. I think stress is the number one cause of almost everything that kills people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Alcohol, I believe, that alcohol is not that big of a deal and small, in moderation, and some alcohols like wine and whatnot are actually good for you at times. But I think you'd probably be better off not to have any than to have too much.
Right.
I also know that there are good points to caffeine, but very often caffeine comes with sugar.
Mm-hmm.
And sugar is another huge factor in many of the, heart disease, and isn't that number one still, heart disease?
Mm-hmm. I think so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I have a problem with the whole humans are supposed to be vegetarians things, especially just from my own family experience. I have a couple members of my family who could not live without meat-based protein. Mm-hmm. That's just the way their bodies work. And so you can't make these broad brush statements like humans weren't meant to eat meat. Now, humans got teeth to eat meat. Meat in moderation is fine. We need protein sources. We need high protein diets. Humans weren't meant to eat GMO, and humans weren't meant to eat these crops of our grains are no longer artisan grains. Our grains have lost all their nutrients. So that's another whole piece of the puzzle too. Right. If you want to go all the way back to Noah, their food was pure. So I don't think that you could just pick meat out of that at all.
Right, and I think that's a really good point, because there was a study recently. I heard this on the radio, so I can't say what the source was, but, when you hear things in the media, it's always true, so right. I'm just going to go with it. But it was very compelling, and it took meat eaters versus vegetarians, and they found that on average, there wasn't a huge disparity in their weight or their general health. And so someone might be pressed to say, well, how could someone who only eats vegetables or only eats plants get fat? But the problem is that especially our processed carbohydrates and grains and breads that we consume en masse are not excluded from a vegetarian diet, and that's one of our biggest problems. Everything's got bread. Everything's got cereal. All of these things that contribute to keeping us unhealthy. And some people might argue, well, they've been eating bread since, the dawn of time. But it's, as you point out, it's not the same. It's not the same kind of thing. It's not stripped of all its nutrients. It's not stripped of all of its health value. It's not essentially cardboard full of
juiced and sprayed with chemicals. And sadly, that's how we produce our food now, and that's also allowed us to have the lifestyle that we have, is because we were able to get off the farm. So, we can long for the old days of growing our own artisan wheat and grinding it, and sometimes I do long for those days, but, you didn't do anything but work the farm.
Right.
That was all you did, so.
Which in and of itself is a hard, labor-intensive job that contributes to you being in pretty good shape.
Exactly. So yeah, you can't. I mean, it's comparing apples and oranges when you're trying to say that anybody can live today the way that Noah's family lived. It's impossible. Those things don't even exist.
I tend to agree. And so I'm going to just keep eating steak.
I would like a steak right now.
I would too. So I would say that was a lot of really informative information, but, I don't think that we really hit on the really hard-hitting news of the day. And as you and I know, the best place to go for that kind of information is always where? You know what I'm talking about.
Before it's news.
Before it's news. If I want to know what's really going on, I want to know about it before it is news, and probably never will be news. So let's check it out.
The only chance it has of being news is right here.
Exactly. So I'm just going to go right to the source before it's news, and they have this really handy system where they give you the top 50, I think, most important news of the day. And what do you got?
Don't worry. Planet X, Nibiru, now close to the Earth and Sun. Closest to the Earth, August 2014, and it's coming fast. Captured on film.
Holy crap. The crazy thing about that is I didn't even know we found Nibiru, but somehow this journalist, this reporter, it found out not only where it is, but that it's going to hit us at any time.
Oh, it's coming fast, and it's captured on film.
Oh,
Two suns rising. My goodness.
That is really something. Now, see, I think that is almost as fascinating as the following story. Okay, so did you know? Now, this is one of the top stories, so we know that this is important to us and to our survival. Did you know that there is irrefutable proof that Michelle Obama is a man?
I did know that. I have seen that story. The finger is the finger length, right?
Yeah, it's all about the finger length. And I mean, that woman, she's got a strong jaw. She's got a very strong jawline.
I know. But you know what? I have the same fingers as her, so then I started freaking out. Because I was like, wait a minute, this whole story is based on her finger length, and I looked at my fingers, and they look exactly like hers.
Dang
what does that mean?
I don't even want to speculate. I don't even want to go there. I would rather just move on to the next story because I don't want to implicate you.
Updated. Martial law checkpoints. Why are police and FBI putting strange marks on people's hands in Michigan?
We need some listeners in Michigan to let us know about the hand marks.
Yes.
Do you have one? Do you know someone who has one? Does it make you have contact with extraterrestrials? We got to know. And then the next thing I want to address is that Father God discusses taking Illuminati to Instant Karma Dead Planet to learn their lessons.
Well,
now,
that sounds like a good idea. I'm for that.
I think so too. I mean, what are you going to do with the Illuminati except just take them to a dead planet and teach them a little bit about the Golden Rule? It might help.
Oh my goodness.
What are you seeing?
A real demon is boldly introduced on stage on national television. Proof that many magicians utilize powers of hell in their magic. Jaw-dropping videos.
What?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think that's interesting, but I think that the more important information here is that a fireball has lit up 7 states. Now, that's interesting in and of itself, but did you know it's a possible spaceship? People blown away by what they saw. So, when I see, I don't know about you, but when I see a fireball, I'm thinking possible spaceship instantly. Instantly
the
possible.
First thing my mind goes to.
Things like this. These are things we need to know.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And
we need to tell our listeners.
And we do. Because the interesting thing about Before It's News, on a serious note, the idea of the site when it initially, I was there when this site came up. And I was contacted by the guy who founded this site. This was, 6 years ago, whatever it was. And he had contacted me because I had a little bit of notoriety in the sort of fringier fields, and I focused more on politics and that type of thing, alternative news at that time. And he wanted to know if I would be willing to contribute some of my content to Before It's News. And he presented it very much as, this is going to be essentially a news aggregate of people who are interested in going outside of the mainstream for information. On the surface, that sounds great. Like, that is a great idea. And because we all know that the mainstream media tends to largely be bought and paid for by different interests. But quickly, the site exploded into something entirely different. And I suppose it's not, it was unavoidable, because I do want to say that Before It's News is not something where there's just a group of people sitting around in a boardroom tossing around ideas about what headlines should make the news. I mean, it is something that I could be a part of, you could be a part of, you and I could sign up for Before It's News tonight and write anything we wanted to and could make it into a headline.
Maybe we should.
Maybe we should. And in fact, I won't name any names, but I know a few people who have done so just to, try to mess with people, where they sign up for an account and they make an outrageous headline, they make an outrageous fake profile, and then they present it as though it's something serious. And then unfortunately, you've got a whole lot of crazies waiting in the wings to pick up on those stories, spread them around Facebook and Twitter, and suddenly it becomes something that people can sit back and laugh about. And it's at equal points humorous and sad.
Yeah.
So, I guess that is kind of fun to do. You see it flying through the Facebook news feeds periodically, where it's like, oh no, Comet Ison has regenerated and it's headed straight for the Empire State Building.
Yeah, 10 seconds to get out of the way.
And Obama is, manning the controls. But,
Bruce Willis is on his way.
Urgent, all caps, update. It's crazy because people believe it. That's the part where it goes into this whole different realm. People hear it and they believe it, and they share it and other people believe it. And it makes anyone who has an interest in, we could call it exopolitics, anyone who has an interest in an alternative media style of reporting is made out to look like a fool.
Right. Which, that's human nature.
Yeah.
They take something that's interesting or that has truth in it, and then they just run it to the farthest edge of reality and then jump over the cliff with it. And then the problem with it is then it ruins that kernel of truth that might be in there for anybody else, because they don't want to be anywhere near it, because then they look like the Fruit Loop that jumped over the cliff.
Right.
With the story.
Right, because, for example, I find a lot of Christians get into this. And it's unfortunate because it takes anyone who's interested in looking at, prophecy, for example, and makes them look crazy. Mm-hmm. Because you've got headlines like, is this the, disaster predicted in, fill in the blank book, and then it has something to do with a comet or wormwood or what have you. And, there's reasons to look at those kinds of things, and there's lots of writers and researchers who look at those things through a little bit more of a sane lens. But then you've got all these other people who just take it to that whole different level where nobody ends up being taken seriously.
Right.
So.
Well, and that happens in so many, if we want to get serious for a minute, that happens across the gamut in Christianity. It's happened to, the gifts of the Spirit have all been completely tainted by idiots, mm-hmm. taking it to ridiculous and embarrassing extremes.
Yeah.
Everything has been.
Mm-hmm.
Every one of my favorite mentors had a statement that said something similar to every real truth of God has been ruined by the representatives, by the human representatives taking it to an extreme.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really good observation because when you do go to these extremes, whether it's extreme, these churches where people are, barking like dogs and, drunk on the Spirit and toking the Holy Ghost and grave sucking and all of that, then you have the other extreme where it's like, shut it down. There is no Holy Ghost in this place.
The Spirit does not move here. You are safe.
That's right.
Exactly. And you can see why. You can see it. If you look at it, if you just step back and take a look at what people have done with the gifts of the Spirit, mm-hmm. and this absolute crazy that has come out of some of these movements, you totally can understand why people react with the 180-degree opposite. Well, that was bad, so it must be all bad. 100% of that was bad. So we're going to root 100% of that out of our church.
Right.
And then it leaves you with zero. And you do that with everything, and suddenly you have these pablum churches that we have, and it's the fault of human nature.
Yeah. Yeah. And both sides are missing the major component, which is that, when Paul talks about the gifts of the Spirit, it is in the same letters where he specifically says that everything should be decently in order in all congregations in fellowship for Jesus Christ. That was a giant paraphrase. I can't remember exactly how it's worded, but it's to that effect where things should be done decently and in order. But in the same vein, he is not excluding or diminishing these gifts at all. Mm-hmm. So it's the extremes that get it to where nobody
wants to go near it.
Nobody's taken seriously. Yeah, exactly. And then you have all kinds of problems. So, that is, I didn't know Before It's News was going to take us there, did you?
I know, I was just thinking, how did we get there? And then I realized it was Before It's News. See?
Amazing. I think that, you and I had discussed previous to the show that there was going to be a few topics that we just thought we had to discuss that are kind of, in two cases, they're current events type topics, and then in one case, it's just something that's been weighing on both of our hearts recently. And so I think if it's fine with you, Diana, we'll save that one for last, mm-hmm. and then we'll kind of close the show with that. And then, but what we're talking about a little bit, and I don't think we'll spend a ton of time on this because I think everybody's spending a ton of time on this, and that might be part of why we want to talk about it, is this whole thing with the Ebola, quote, outbreak.
Yes.
And, I've been following it a little bit because as I have discussed previously, I am one of those kind of sadistic people who I like to watch movies about outbreaks and read books about these
things.
I know, these terrible disasters that may befall humankind. And so there's a part of me that is just drawn to these stories, not because I think they're exciting or titillating, but because I have managed in the past to scare myself by watching or reading fiction. My gosh, I just recently reread The Andromeda Strain by Michael Crichton. And now granted, that is a space virus, but all the same, sorry, should have said spoiler alert. But, still, the Ebola thing is kind of scary. I read a book, some years ago called The Hot Zone, and the author's name escapes me at the moment, but the story did follow the origins of Ebola and similar viruses and some real cases of how, I think I want to say one was in Reston, Virginia, where some monkeys that were shipped over from the Philippines managed to find their way into the United States, and they were infected with Ebola, and, the CDC kind of kept it on the down low, didn't want to scare people. So it's interesting because a lot of these headlines say that Ebola could never come to America, but in fact, it already has.
And we brought it here.
Right.
And we purposely brought it here now, and I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, I guess if I was somebody that was infected with Ebola and I was in Africa or whatever, I would really want to come home for treatment, but I don't know.
Yeah, no. It's a hard conundrum because, there's a really good article. I'll link to it in the show notes. It's called something like Obala.
What you thinking about?
Ebola, what you need to know. And the whole thing, it goes through what Ebola is, what it does, where it started, where it's gone, the history of Ebola, the statistics about Ebola. I mean, the current strain that's going on right now is like a 90% mortality rate. So that's really intense, but it also dispels some myths, and one of which is that Ebola is not something like SARS or even the common influenza where it's airborne. It literally involves swapping fluids in order to get it. And then the other thing that it addresses is that, let's say, for example, there would be someone infected in the United States, not necessarily these people that have been shipped over who are already, but let's say, in transit somehow Ebola transferred from one person to the next and there was like a mini outbreak. The idea is that in the United States it wouldn't be nearly as dramatic as it is, say, in West Africa, just based solely on our advanced medical technologies, our advances in containment and things like that. That even if it did come to the United States, it would probably never reach pandemic level because we would be able to address it, seal it off, and not let it continue. Unlike, let's say, if there was you remember, it was maybe like 6 or 7 years ago when there was that big swine flu scare, and that one was a little bit more realistic for people to get worked up about, because that is something that could be transmitted through sneezing, coughing, and airborne type of thing, that Ebola is not. So, and there is a headline on CNN right now that says from the CDC, this Ebola patient, this doctor from Liberia who was brought here for treatment, seems to be improving. Which begs the question, is the 90% mortality rate based on the actual progression of the disease, or is it more based on the inability to address the disease in the areas where it tends to break out?
That's a good question.
Because it doesn't seem interesting that suddenly this guy who was they reported his condition as grave when he was in West Africa, and suddenly he's in the U.S. and he's, quote, improving. It's interesting.
It is. But then there's that thing that I was reading right before we started the show about the West Africans that are supposedly coming across the border with all of these Central Americans, and they're not doing health screenings. That's potentially a big problem. That is a potential disaster, really. I mean, I guess the whole thing is.
Yeah. Well, and because in that case, we don't know that they're here, and how many people would end up infected before they would recognize that Ebola had made its way across the border. And at that point, how do you track down how many people were in contact with the primary source? And
then you're in a movie.
Yeah, then all of a sudden it is... you know those movies where they show like a map of the United States and there's like a couple of dots and then all of a sudden like the whole America is red?
Exactly, and Dustin Hoffman's in a suit yelling.
Right? We don't want that to happen. Let's get this Ebola under control. Please. That is a really, really terrible thing that we were both cracking up about Ebola. Because it is not funny.
It isn't. But we have to find humor in life.
We have to. We absolutely have to. And, from where I stand, and that's another thing on the Before It's News. And I knew you and I were going to talk about Ebola, so I didn't want to transition that early. But I'm sure you noticed that probably about 40 of the top 50 stories on Before It's News were Ebola related.
Yes, and I was avoiding them as well.
Yeah. And they're always like, is this the biblical plague we've been warned about,
And unleashed by the government.
Yeah, I know. And I mean, I laugh, but I mean, who knows? Maybe there's truth to it. But it's just interesting when there's 40 different stories and 40 different theories, and all 40 of them are speaking authoritatively on their theory. I guess we just pray that this outbreak, the interesting thing about Ebola, as a side note, one of the things I read about it was that it tends to go in cycles where for some reason it dies out. And, there'll be an outbreak. It might last a year, maybe 2, and then it goes away and it goes dormant for, maybe 10, 15 years. And it doesn't seem to necessarily be related to the fact that people get it under control, but the disease itself goes dormant. And maybe it just has a certain cycle of potency and then it dies down. I don't know. That would be a question for Sharon Gilbert. She seems to know a lot about, because of her background and her expertise, she knows a lot about these diseases and the viruses and that type of thing. But the point is, this is not the first Ebola outbreak in history. It will not be the last, and something tells me that it's going to fade from memory before we know it.
Yeah. I hope so.
I hope so, too. But if not, Dustin Hoffman, paging Dustin Hoffman. We need to look at the map. Those maps are usually never good news. I mean, either it's a virus or it's a zombie outbreak.
Exactly. Or aliens.
Or aliens. Oh, those maps with the red dots, always bad news. So, I don't know. I don't think we need to say too much more about Ebola. Yeah. But the next thing we wanted to talk about is something that is, I think it's of particular interest to girls, but it also does affect boys, and that is what recently, past week or so, the trailer for the release of the upcoming film 50 Shades of Grey hit the internet and took the internet by storm, not unlike the book has done since it was released. For those of you who are unfamiliar with 50 Shades of Grey, this is going to kind of wander into more mature territory, but the basic plot line is that there's this young, impressionable woman who gets, and tell me if I'm wrong, Diana, this is just what I've gleaned from it, but there's this young woman who gets hired by this bajillionaire named Christian Grey, who is kind of this cold, clinical type of young man who owns his own business, his own company, CEO of a company, what have you. Anyway, she gets hired by him. He seduces her and introduces her to a life of sadomasochism, bondage type things, and she thinks it's awesome. And a couple more novels. There's a series of 3 that came out of this, and they're all exploring this sexual relationship between the main character, Christian Grey, and the young girl whose name I can't remember. And it's all about this dominant sex where Christian Grey is the aggressor and he ties her up, standard bondage stuff. And it is all the rage amongst, well, they say it's a story for desperate housewives, but it sure seems to me that it's mainly targeted towards young girls. And you know a lot more about what young girls are into these days. Diana, can you speak to that?
Yeah, it is absolutely, I don't know if it's the taboo nature of it, because it's, it's put out there as definitely explicit material, mature audience only. But yeah, I will not say that I have read the book. I have not read the book. I read a few excerpts of it, a chapter here, a chapter there. It was so poorly written that I couldn't bring myself to waste my time on it. But it is very explicit. It's really silly. I mean, the expectations of this bazillionaire, and it sounds like it was written by a teenager who was writing about their fantasy and has never actually had any experience in anything that they're writing about. But it's just basically, it's porn. Mm-hmm. It's porn. It's pretty porn.
Right.
It's wrapped up in a pretty package for young ladies. And the problem that I really have with the whole thing is that it is just portraying unrealistic characters, unrealistic life, unrealistic expectations for a sexual relationship, unrealistic expectations for the roles that men and women play, dangerous role models, things that are glamorized that are not glamorous in real life. And, it just comes back to, I get so upset with our culture and how corrupted it's become and what we're doing to our kids. Mm-hmm. I think, does not anybody stop and think about this? I mean, it's not just it's a story, don't worry about it, it's just a fantasy, it's harmless. It's not harmless. It's building up expectations, it's building up things that a girl thinks that they need to live up to, especially young women. What they think they need to live up to these standards of beauty and of performance, and then they have expectations that a guy is never going to be able to live up to. And it starts kids out. Not only are they over-sexualized, too young, too early, too absolutely explicitly, but it sets them up to have terrible relationships, unhealthy relationships, unstable relationships, an expectation of something that they will never find.
Right.
And to me, it is absolutely heartbreaking. It absolutely breaks my heart to see this stuff out there and to see these girls just, just loving it, just reading it. We can't read it fast enough.
Right. And, I think a part of it, too, is that because, and you and I have discussed this at length, but there's this, I won't use the terminology that we tend to use, but there's this thing that seems to be happening to males worldwide where, you know what I'm driving at.
Yeah.
Where they tend to be emasculated.
Yeah.
And as a result, girls now, I think as women, we are programmed, to be attracted to men and manly things, right? That's what we seek out. That's how we identify the object of our desire. And so when you have a culture where manhood is considered something that should be oppressed, something that should be put down so that women could be more equal, that men could be by their very manhood are portrayed as oppressors. And right. Therefore you have this generation of girls now for the first time who kind of don't know largely what a man's man looks like. And whether they cannot recognize it in their fathers, whether they cannot recognize it in their peers, whatever the case is. And as a result, when they read books of this nature and hear stories or see movies of this nature where it's this extreme domination from a man to a girl, I think it sparks something in the girl where, because she doesn't understand what the real male role is supposed to look like, she confuses it with that. She thinks that is what the man is supposed to do. And if you are a woman, you're meant to be demure and just take it, and that it's pleasurable and that's the way it's supposed to be. And so then we're raising up, and I mean, obviously this is kind of going over some of the things that you just said, but then we're raising up this generation of girls who their identification of what a man is something brutish, rather than something strong but compassionate, whether it's masculine but also kind. They don't get that anymore. They get either a man who is completely emasculated, who is, yes, dear, or they get the man who is to the other extreme, where he's the Christian Grey style, who is abusive.
Right. And there's another element to this series too. Again, I haven't read it, but I know the storyline. There's a book. There's 3. It's a trilogy. Did you know that?
Yep.
Okay. And I guess by the end of the 3rd one, she has managed to transform him into this wonderful man who doesn't dominate and hurt, and he's not into it anymore because she really didn't like it. She just put up with it because he was so gorgeous. Yeah. So then we have this other thing of, well, if he's good looking enough, then we just keep with it and we change them because we can change the men, which is you don't go into a relationship thinking you're going to change somebody. That's a bad idea. If you get into a long-term relationship, you're both going to change, but you don't get into it with the idea of I'm going to change him into the man that I want.
Yeah, well, and it kind of goes along to, with these women who allow themselves to be victimized for years on end. That's the classic syndrome where it's like, well, maybe he hurts me every once in a while, but, I think he really loves me and he's just so incredibly dreamy that maybe he'll change, and maybe if he loves me enough, he'll stop doing these things. And I'm not saying that someone who's abusive cannot have a recovery or rehabilitation from that, but it's not something you should seek out.
Right, and it's not something you should knowingly go into. I mean, people make mistakes all the time, and we find ourselves in these situations. But we should not be encouraging girls to go into dangerous and abusive relationships based on a physical attraction or any other kind of attraction, and then say, well, I can change him, just like Christian Grey.
Right. And then on the other, it kind of goes in lockstep with what you mentioned, that this is really nothing short of pretty pornography aimed at younger children. But on a larger scale, there was an article that came out, and I'll have to try to find it before I publish this, but there's an article that came out that talked about, there was a poll of 8th graders. Yeah. And how many of them had been exposed to pornography? And I'm talking like not a Playboy magazine, but hardcore pornography. And pretty much universally they all had at some point. And then the questions went into, what these children see and expect sex to be like. Now, aside from whether or not any of these or many of these children had engaged in sexual activity, it was troubling what they thought was the norm. And it was all because of what they had seen online. And it was really scary because where they had the little boys, and I don't even know how ethical the methodology of this poll was, because they must have been getting these kids to say some pretty inappropriate things, but the boys tended to get really excited by the topic, and they wanted to talk about all the things they had seen and all the things that they were going to do someday. But then when they got to the little girls, it was interesting because the little girls had seen the same thing, had the same expectations, but were more of the, that's just the way it is. Kind of they didn't get excited about it. They were more just like, I guess that's just what happens, and maybe when I'm older I'll learn to like it. And that just troubled me. And then it went even further into talking about how the exposure to such extreme sexual images and ideas and concepts actually had an effect on the physical brain wiring and chemistry of these people, to the point where, over time, we're going to be having a next generation where they physically have different expressions
and appetites yes.
of sexuality. That's terrifying to me because anyone who's ever perused the internet, you're going to accidentally happen upon something that is just horrifying, and you're going, oh my gosh, I can't believe that this is just that readily available for anybody with a computer and a mouse or a laptop or a tablet or whatever to come upon.
Or a phone nowadays.
Or a phone, yeah. And if I can happen upon it when I'm Googling something about, whatever, of course kids are going to know how to find these things.
Mm-hmm.
So when you talk about an 8th grader, I'm guessing plenty of 8th grade girls or in that age range have read 50 Shades of Grey. And,
I'm quite sure of it.
Yeah, and people and parents are, I think they think of it as something akin to Twilight. Or Harry Potter, which, not to say anything about the content of those books, but at least they're not teaching, sadomasochism on that blatant of a scale.
Right.
But it's not the same. It's not the same thing. But is it the next step? Is it the next? Because, you have your books about vampires and how there is an inherent domination taking place there just because he's got this supernatural power. And if you want to be with him, he has to do this abusive thing to your body to change you into being acceptable for him. So maybe something like 50 Shades of Grey is the next step for kids who are already into that sort of mythology. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. I just think that as appetites grow, it's if there is no mechanism and no societal norm or societal way of suppressing some of that, either through shame or through making it more taboo. There's nothing taboo about porn in our society at all.
Mm-mm.
And so we encourage that, and so then as those things are addictive.
Yeah.
Porn is an absolute addiction. And as any addict knows, the addiction grows, and you have to feed it and feed it and feed it. And so you have to feed it with more, farther down the road. And so that's just where we're going, because everybody wants the next high. And once you've already had the endorphins from, this procedure or this idea or that position or this storyline, you have to take it to the next level. Otherwise, you're not going to get the endorphins anymore because you've already made it to that point.
Mm-hmm.
And so it will continue to spiral unless and until society as a whole says, whoa, and really throws a wrench in the wheel of the spokes, and the youth say, no, this is not right, this is objectifying, this is not good for us. If that were to happen, which
I don't know.
We know, as Christians, we know that we're not going to turn the world around. Mm-hmm. That it's spiraling downward. But there are moments of redemption throughout human history. So I am the first person to absolutely say that it's possible. Sure. And I see some of that in some of the youth that I know. They just think that this culture is ridiculous. It's a joke. And they're not to the point of completely rebelling against it yet, but maybe the next generation is.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I see more traditional values in the kids today than 10 years ago.
Sure. Well,
I see the girls of today wanting monogamy and romanticism and looking forward to marriage and talking about having children and thinking abortion is awful. would never consider it. I see more of that now than I did maybe even when I was in school.
Well, it could be that things have gotten to such an outrageous level and such a ridiculous level that traditional values are something that people feel nostalgic about rather than something that they witness. And therefore, maybe it's possible that there will be a cultural backlash to where society has become so circus-esque that there's a new generation coming up that's saying, this is outrageous. This is ridiculous. Because, if we take, let's go to, if we go all the way back to the 17th century, all the way back to the French Revolution, and you have people like the Marquis de Sade. And, of course, he is the one upon whom words like sadism and sadomasochism come from, because he was a revolutionary who wrote these horrifying stories about, he was a libertine. And the purpose of what he wrote was, it was certainly not the same purpose that the author of 50 Shades of Grey had. The Marquis de Sade, not to be an apologist for him by any stretch of the imagination, he was a sicko. But his idea was to spit in the face of all that was considered decent, largely in a political, philosophical way. He wanted to blaspheme against all standards of morality and law, and that's why he wrote these horrible stories about these abusive things happening of a sexual nature.
Well, his whole thing was he was reacting to the new paradigm in philosophy that man is determined, that we're chemically determined, and therefore if we are chemically determined, and if men are chemically and physically stronger than women, then there is no reason why we should not do these things.
Mm-hmm. Right. And, obviously, as anyone who's even read a few chapters of 50 Shades of Grey, the author of this, again, had no such philosophical, good, bad, or otherwise, motivations. That the author of 50 Shades of Grey was trying to write a titillating story to court the lowest common denominator of fans, being, essentially young, impressionable girls. Take Marquis de Sade, there was really nothing that was appealing to women in those stories. But the point being that, obviously his stories and his philosophy came out of what he perceived as oppression. And then during the French Revolution, obviously the whole story of Marquis was he was in the insane asylum for a while. There's a really interesting movie about his life. But then ultimately there was a backlash against him. So the point I'm trying to make is that sometimes things can go to such an outrageous level that eventually there is a cultural backlash against the thing that was once considered revolutionary. Mm-hmm. So if we think that right now we're in an era with fluid sexuality and, the emasculation of men, coupling it with the generation that's looking to figure out what men are supposed to be, so they envision them as these abusive relationships, maybe, as you're saying, that somewhere along the line we're going to hit sort of that ceiling where we have a generation that says this is out of control and our revolution is going to be to the reclaiming of traditional values. I don't see it happening on a gigantic scale, but I think it's possible that an element of society will go back to a more traditional state because of just being in the face of all of this depravity.
Mm-hmm. And the things that just don't make sense, and how following some of these ideas out to their logical conclusion, just like that article that I read about the feminists can't handle the transgenders. I mean, that's a big deal. Mm-hmm. So you start following these crazy social and cultural things that are trying to be normalized out to their logical conclusions of just absolute insanity. And at some point, people are going to see the connection, mm-hmm. and they're going to reject it.
Right. Yeah, I think it's only logical, and I think that it's interesting because, you know, obviously there is always that sort of underbelly of society that is going to be attracted to, whether it's fetishism or, you know, whatever is considered taboo. There will always be that. It is a losing battle if we're going to try to come against human depravity, because it's our flesh, you know. Mm-hmm. But to see it, recognize it, identify it, and try to revolt against what is being societally put upon people now, especially young people, you know, I guess our hope is in that they, with good guidance, will recognize it, and at least some segment of society will no longer want to go down that road, at least for now. But
that's how we have to live our lives and how we have to hope.
Absolutely. And not to take it to the extreme of thinking that as Christians we're going to conquer the world, right. You know, because that just doesn't even follow with everything that we know to be true. But we can certainly have our own sort of little countercultural revolutions for our own families and our own fellowship.
Yep. Our area of reach. That's what we have to focus on.
Mm-hmm. So I would say if there's anyone out there who is a parent and their kid has a copy of 50 Shades of Grey and they just think it's the latest Twilight book or the latest, you know, teeny bopper romance book, you know, because I'm not a prude. I understand that young girls want to read. You know, when I was in that sort of 8th, 9th, 10th grade, I was reading like Sweet Valley High, you know, and the most racy, risque thing that happened in those books was, you know, someone might make out on a couch, you know, and then I'd be like, oh my gosh, I hope my mom doesn't know I'm reading this, you know.
Right.
But
I long for those days.
Right. Exactly. I mean, now there are kids who are, you know, probably 16 years old who could teach me stuff I've never heard of. So, but if your child has this book, maybe don't make them feel ashamed for having it, because it certainly is something that is cultural right now. It is something that their peers are into. It's something that, you know, isn't really looked down upon by society. And so to make them feel ashamed for it is just going to make them ashamed of it is probably just going to make them think that you're a jerk, you know, or that you don't understand them, or make them feel ashamed or bad that they did something incredibly bad. But maybe take it more as an opportunity to have this kind of discussion with them about how, you know, this book doesn't really accurately portray the way relationships are supposed to be or the way they're supposed to look. This isn't something that you should be seeking out. You know, take it as an opportunity to have that conversation. If they're old enough to read the book and get any sort of excitement out of it, they're definitely old enough to have that conversation.
Yeah, it's an important one.
Mm-hmm.
And now for something completely different.
As Christians, and this is something that you and I have discussed a lot on a variety of topics, but as Christians, we have this sort of propensity because of, you know, the strength of our faith, which naturally tends to lead to the strength of our convictions, whether it is, you know, our values, our morals, our, you know, our beliefs. We have this tendency to be very condemning to anyone outside of what we consider to be, you know, in the bounds of our core beliefs. And So, interestingly, although Christians have this tendency, and I don't want to, compartmentalize Christians as a whole, but I think that we do have this tendency to come down pretty harshly on people that are sort of outside our perceived norms. And, I think that can be a problem. I think that we have this way of alienating people that does a disservice to what we should be trying to accomplish, which is to bring them into our fold rather than making our Christian culture, so to speak, something that is not desirable because, unfortunately, not necessarily because of what we believe, but because of how we are. We're supposed to lead in such a way that we make our way of life something that is, that someone would want to be a part of. And so whether it's, cultural things, whether it's, a lot of the things that we've discussed already in this show, homosexuality, whether it's an interfaith scenario, whether, charismatic groups or cessationist groups or, interdenominational things, whether it's from, Protestantism to Catholicism or anything along those lines, there tends to be this thing where we draw lines in the sand, and our little box that we live in is the only place that we can function normally from, and we want everyone to conform to what's in our box, or they are damned straight to hell and we want nothing to do with them. So I want to kick off this discussion with you, Diana, by having you share some of your thoughts just on the topic of maybe the lack of compassion that Christians tend to show, not only to people who are non-Christians, but maybe even amongst ourselves.
Yes. I think that is a huge problem. I think that there are two different ways. We're addressing two different markets, so to speak. Mm-hmm. The non-believer who looks at how we treat each other and how we treat them, and if they are in a outcast, quote unquote outcast group of society, how we treat them versus how we treat each other, who are supposed to all be the body of Christ, but yet we have 3,500 different sets of theological dogmas and creeds where everybody thinks they're right. Mm-hmm. So how do we deal with that, and who is right, and who, and this is when the world is looking on, and they look to the Baptists fighting with the Presbyterians, fighting with the Anglicans, fighting with the Catholics. And they look at all that, and they don't want any part of it. Mm-hmm. Because we look a fool.
Right.
Okay, so how do we get to that point? Why does it happen? And I think that you have to kind of look at the root of what causes all that conflict between different versions of the belief system.
Yeah.
And a lot of it has to do with fundamentalism in reality. Did you ever listen to that video I sent you?
I promised you that I would before we did this recording, and I didn't.
You didn't? Okay.
So, you're just going to have to give us a synopsis because I just didn't do it. Okay, I didn't do my homework.
It's all right. It was a video that was posted by I don't remember who on the EI Facebook page, and I just loved it. Nobody else got it. In fact, people were not agreeing with my point on this video, but the woman was talking about, it was a TED Talk, and the title of the talk was something along the lines of doubt is essential to faith.
Okay.
And it was, the context of her talk was that she was looking into Islam out of curiosity. She's an agnostic. She will not call herself an atheist for reasons that she explains later throughout the TED Talk, because she does believe in faith. She just hasn't figured out which one yet. And so in her quest to understand Islam, she discovered by reading his biographies, that he had serious doubts about some of the things that were handed him by Allah or something. I don't really know the exact context of it, but her point was that is what made him be believable in her mind, because her thesis is that without doubt, you cannot have real faith. You can only have fundamentalism. And I did print out her transcript here because I wanted to read just a couple of sentences that she said. And if you take it away from her context and you just put it into the context of faith in general, her thesis is, doubt is essential to faith. And if this seems a startling idea at first, consider that doubt, as Graham Greene once put it, is the heart of the matter. If you abolish all doubt, and what's left is not faith, what you have left is not faith, but absolute heartless conviction. You're certain that you possess the truth, inevitably offered with an implied uppercase T, and this certainty quickly develops into dogmatism and righteousness, by which I mean a demonstrative, overweening pride in being so very right. In short, the arrogance of fundamentalism. This is what happens in all of these different versions of Christianity, is everybody is so sure that they have the answer, because we have been drilled somehow in modern Christianity. We have been drilled with the idea that if you have doubt, you somehow are not a good Christian. And that is not, you cannot have real faith unless you have doubt. Because she goes on to say, we have to recognize that real faith has no easy answers. It's difficult. It's stubborn. It involves an ongoing struggle, a continual questioning of what we think we know, a wrestling with the issues and with the ideas, and it goes hand in hand with doubt in a never-ending conversation. And sometimes we have to be in conscious defiance of it. And that just comes back to what Paul's talking about, working out your faith in fear and trembling. It is a constant observation of what you believe. As you're moving forward and you're learning more, you have to constantly take a step back and say, I've learned more now. Does everything that I think I know fit into that, or do I need to change? But somehow, these ideas that you can't change, that you can't question, that having a doubt makes you a bad Christian, has completely destroyed the ability for people to have real faith and to wrestle with issues and to understand that I have doubts, you have doubts, we have different doctrines. Am I so sure that my understanding of this non-essential, am I so sure to be arrogant and heartless and closed to your idea of how you understand this doctrine? And it's the inability to accept that doubt is okay. Sure. We push this thing saying that if you have any doubt, you just need to get into your Bible and pray more, because it says in there that, they'll probably say that it says in the Bible you can't have doubt, but it doesn't say that in the Bible. Paul is constantly struggling with the truth. Constantly.
Sure, and often when doubt does come up in Scripture, you find it in the context of people who are doubting, but it's not that they are damned because of their doubt. Whether it's someone, saying, help, I believe, help my unbelief. Even in the story of Thomas, who of course is his famous in John, where he's unbelieving, and Jesus says, put your finger here, see my hands, place it in my side, don't disbelieve, believe. Jesus wasn't condemning because Thomas had doubts. He was offering him evidence to change those doubts, to make it more real. And how do we do that now in a modern context when we don't necessarily have Jesus Christ standing in front of us saying, put your finger in my wound and see that it is real? The way we do that now is that we study and we increase our knowledge base and our information to solidify what it is that we claim to believe. And maybe sometimes that involves changing what we believe. And again, I think the important point that you mentioned is that this is largely with regard to the non-essentials. There are certain things as Christians, if we proclaim to be Christians, that we just believe, that we would call, these the core doctrine. Derek Gilbert often says there are certain things that I would take a bullet for, or I would die on that mountain. But there are other things where it's okay to ask questions, and it's okay to refine what it is that you believe, because, I've often said to people when there's these big debates that happen over things that are not necessarily salvational issues, who are we to think that we're going to be able to figure this out on Facebook when this topic has been argued for thousands of years by very intelligent, learned people who cannot come to a consensus on that issue? Is that not rather telling? There was this really good article that someone shared. Oh, I think it was Demetrios shared in the Extraordinary Intelligence Discussion Group, and the article title was "In Essentials Unity, in Non-Essentials Liberty, in All Things Charity." And just that one quote, even if you just go on the headline alone, it says so much. But there is it's a really good article. I'm going to link to it. I'll link to that TED Talk in the show notes, and I'll also link to this. But it kind of summarizes towards the end of this article where it says the saying of, I'm going to butcher this name, Rupertus Meldinius, the line that I just read, which is the headline, strikes the right balance. It calls for unity on the essential things, the core of truth in our union with Christ. Those would be the core that we just talked about. In non-essentials, the not important, but things that, if lacking, do not prevent our union with Christ. It calls for liberty so that we all might follow our consciences under the Word and Spirit. But in all things, however, there must be love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony, which comes from Colossians 3:14. I think that is so vital. As long as we all share the core of what we know to be true, the gospel truth, there are plenty of these other things that there's a reason why there's 18 million denominations, because there are things that I guess are probably pretty non-essential that we disagree on. We all fall under the umbrella of Christians. We believe in John 3:16. We believe in Jesus Christ. But there are nuances that separate us. Now, does that necessarily mean that one group holds the key to salvation whilst everyone else is perishing for lack of understanding? I would suggest that is not what that means, because if that is what that means, I don't know. I think heaven's going to be a pretty lonely place. I think that we have a God who is full of grace and mercy and understanding of our human frailty, and is going to be compassionate toward those of us who maybe don't have all theology figured out to a T, because I don't think
that'd be all of us.
Right, exactly. I was just going to say, that would be everybody who's ever walked the face of the planet would fall under that category. So I think, unfortunately, we just have this propensity to lean on our own understanding, so to speak, and to not express that charity to one another in knowing that we ourselves don't have it all figured out. And where the doubt can come in is perhaps we're having a lively discussion and it gets to a point where now, am I still fighting for something that I strongly believe in, or have I crossed into the territory of now I'm just fighting because I don't want to admit that I've been caused to ask a question about what I thought that I knew to be true? Am I fighting now for my faith, or am I fighting to be right? You know, and perhaps if we were more willing to acknowledge doubt and say, you know what, you posed a doggone good question there, and if I'm being 100% honest, I confess that my stance is wavering a little bit here. And part of the reason that I'm getting so aggressive right now is because I don't like feeling that way. You know, I think it happens more than people admit.
It does. And humans don't like being wrong. And then it comes into that whole thing where I've been wrong all this time. Oh my gosh. You know, you don't want to have to question. What else am I going to have to question? You know, it's scary. It's better to just hold your ground and stay ignorant than to boldly question whatever it is that's on your mind. I mean, God will stand up to any of it. God's truth will always stand up. So what are you afraid of?
Right.
You can question anything, and if God's word doesn't hold up, well then, you know what? You better to find out now, because then you could, you know, live your life like there's no tomorrow.
And as
now than later.
Right. And I mean, you know, as believers, obviously, all of our questions as to whether or not, you know, God exists, whether or not the Bible is true, whether or not Jesus Christ is the Son of God and is God, all of the, you know, that he died, resurrected, all of these questions we're pretty firm on if we're giving ourselves the label of Christian. So from that point, where do you wander into territory that you have officially endangered your own salvation? Like, where is that line? Now, biblically, you know, there are those who would say that there are certain things you can do or say or believe that would threaten that. And I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that, because you do have people like Mormons, for example, who proclaim to be Christians, but they have a completely different concept of Jesus Christ that is foreign to what the Bible tells us about Jesus Christ. They don't believe in the same Jesus that we do, even though they claim to do so, because they believe all kinds of corny things like Jesus was, you know, the brother of Lucifer, and that God, you know, was just a man who was reincarnated on a different planet, all of this jazz. So we can say, yeah, in some cases, even if you claim to be a believer in Jesus Christ, is it the Jesus that checks out with Scripture? You know, but then there are others who maybe they have theological differences that seem pretty foreign to someone who has been raised a certain way, but because it's different, because it goes into territory that we don't necessarily agree with. You see this a lot in like the Calvinist versus, you know, Reformed versus non-Reformed type of debates. Obviously one is right and one is wrong on some level, even though I believe there's probably nuances therein that no one gets 100% right. But, you know, at the end of the day, one of them is a little closer to the truth than the other. So does that mean that the other side is, you know, condemned? Or is it something that people waste a whole lot of time when in reality it as I said, is not a salvation-threatening issue.
Yeah, I would say so, but I don't know if it's wasted time. I don't think honestly debating these issues is time wasted.
Right.
But to get to the point of condemning or judging someone to not be a Christian on some of these issues, the anger and the just lack of charity shown on some of these most heated topics. I mean, you can have people lose family members over a rapture discussion or a reformed theology discussion or, in a young earth versus old earth discussion. And it shouldn't happen. That is wrong. That is not how God told us to deal with each other in Hebrews or in Ephesians. So, we just need to understand that there are that all things are not given to us. I think that a lot of the mysteries are left there for us to find and study in God's Word because we're made in His image and we're curious. I mean, God could have just written everything down in a book and delivered it to us in a, 14-volume set, but He didn't. So there's a reason for that, right? I mean, He wanted us to come together. He wanted us to come reason together. He wanted people to talk. He wanted people to study. All those things are in the Scriptures. Study to show yourselves approved. Come, let us reason together. He wanted people to talk about these things.
Absolutely. And I certainly don't want anyone to think that I'm against debating because obviously that's the whole reason I started the discussion group, because I love debating and I love discussing and that type of thing. Where it gets frustrating to me is when it crosses into mean-spiritedness and condemnation and as this article points out, that charity is so important, and that so many of these discussions venture into the lack of charity toward one another. And and I will say that, I don't know if I necessarily want to say it right now, but there are certain things in my mind where there is a line in the sand where I will say, okay, that particular theological thought train is, now you are perverting the gospel. Now you are perverting the core. And that I'm not okay with, and that I'll get a little bit more aggressive about. But I think we can all get to points where we recognize these things. And then the next question then becomes, well, I just have to do a little tangent here because you brought up rapture. One of, surprisingly, here I am, this chick from North Dakota who decided to start a podcast, who never proclaimed to be an authority on anything, never proclaimed to be a biblical scholar, never, all I have is my story and what information I've gleaned over time. That's all I have, and just trying to spark discussions and conversations. And yet, I apparently have throughout my days said some things that people perceive as somewhat controversial, which has always strikes me as bizarre because I don't understand. I tend to be pretty open. I tend to be one of those people where I'm like, hey, I'm open to that, hey, whatever, that sounds interesting. Let me look into that some more. But I have found that when you say things like that, people don't like it. They're actually offended by they're offended by your unwillingness to take a hard stance on absolutely everything. And one of the things that I have said that gained me some of the most, I hesitate to call it hate mail, but let's call it strong,
dislike mail.
Yeah. Yes. Well, strong. It goes into the strong dislike folder, and it was a couple of years ago. I was actually being interviewed by Daniel Ott on the Edge broadcast, and that is a really interesting show to go on because it's live, and he has a chat room where there are a wide variety of people with a wide variety of opinions and beliefs, and very strong in what they believe, and they're in real time feeding questions to Daniel to ask the guest. And Daniel is pretty equal opportunity. He'll just grab whatever the question is and just throw it at you, which it's an exercise in just being prepared for anything. But one of the people in the chat room said, well, what does Natalina believe about the rapture? Mm-hmm. And of course, the minute I got that question, I was like, oh man, like, great. Why do we have to go here? But I said, so the question was given to me as pre, mid, or post. And so I replied that I think the rapture, this is paraphrasing myself, but I said something along the lines of, I believe the rapture is biblical and it is shrouded in mystery, and that it is something that if the answer to the exact timing or place when the rapture is going to take place was if it was something that was extremely clear biblically, it wouldn't be a topic that we all get into these fights about all the time. It wouldn't be something that we would have such wide, varying disagreement about amongst very devout believers. There are scriptures that someone can quote and say, see, this proves pre-trib rapture, and then there's another scripture that someone could pull out and say, see, this proves mid. And whatever the case is, I am not saying that the answers are not in scripture, but I will always proclaim two things. One, that I believe there is mystery involved, and no one's probably got it 100% figured out. And two, that whether or not you have it figured out, it is something that is hurting Christians to be so rigid about that they would actually fight with one another over it, as though it was a question of salvation as to whether or not you know when the rapture is going to happen. That's essentially what I said. I thought that was very diplomatic. I felt pretty good about that answer. It was a really long way of saying, I don't know. But but I got so much anger from that, and the messages and the emails started rolling in right away. The show was live, and before the interview was even over, I was getting messages from people saying that was the weakest answer I have ever heard on the rapture, and people saying, you don't even know anything about the Bible, you've obviously never read it, your faith is weak, your faith is in jeopardy, all of this stuff. And at first, because, you know, most people who listen to me or have read what I've written or know my testimony, I haven't been a Christian comparatively to some of the other people in this niche all that long. You know, it's been maybe 7-ish years, something like that. I, in many circles, am considered just a baby in the faith, and I'm still learning and figuring things out. And so I'm not going to come forward and proclaim that I am authority on the rapture. Even if I have an opinion about it, I'm not going to put myself out there as an authority on it or tell people that here's what I believe that you should believe about it. If I have a question or a doubt about something, I'm going to be really open about it, because I don't want to mislead anyone, and I certainly don't want to make someone feel ashamed for having a belief that I don't share. So I think that's really something to keep in mind, is that I think it's okay to just say you don't know. It's okay to be like,
obviously,
I don't know.
You have no faith in this week, and I don't know. I'm worried about your soul now.
Well, you know, you wouldn't be alone in that concern. With all the people who think I am just an apologist for the Catholics now, my gosh, everybody's worried about my eternal salvation. So, I mean, and that's another topic. I mean, it's quite controversial, because I think that I wasn't sure if I even wanted to go here, but, you know, I think that a lot of people, particularly in evangelical circles, tend to view Catholics, particularly Roman Catholics, with a lot of distrust and with a lot of, in some cases, hate.
condemnation
for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And while there are certainly a lot of the theological problems with what the RCC holds to be true, I think that they are really off course on a lot of things. Am I going to go to a Catholic and say, you're going to hell? Absolutely not. I don't think that's true.
I agree with you. And the reason that there's so much animosity between the evangelicals and the Protestants and the Catholics it goes back to the Reformation, because, that was the enemy, right? The Catholic Church was the enemy. And because it was the enemy, then I think I said this earlier in regards to something else, obviously Catholicism was corrupted. And so, obviously, this is human nature thinking, obviously every single thing that is a part of that religion is corrupt. So obviously we need to do the exact opposite of everything they do, throw everything out, save nothing, and create this thing over here that's the exact 180-degree opposite, because obviously Catholicism was bad, so the opposite will obviously be good. And that's what is perpetuated out there. And so then we have this, irrational persecution and it almost seems like hatred, which just blows my mind, of the Catholic devout. There's plenty to discuss and plenty to point out about Catholicism at large and infallibility of the Pope and some of their doctrines that the Pope has declared are, and put on the books. There's plenty to be discussed about that. But your average, how many billion Catholics in the world, to say that they're all going to hell, I just can't go there.
I can't either, and I personally know quite a few people who are Catholic, and devoutly so. One of my dearest friends in the world is about as Catholic as you can get. Her family is like, when you go into their family home, there's like little statues of different saints in there, and her father was a deacon in the Catholic Church, and she and her husband are raising their children Catholic, and they go to their local Roman Catholic Church, and she teaches the Catholic equivalent of Sunday school. I can't remember what it's called, but essentially she is extremely, extremely Catholic, okay? But she, in so many ways, is a better Christian than me. She gets into her Bible study like you wouldn't believe. She is so quick to give thanks to Jesus for everything that happens in her life, and to go to Jesus for help when she's in trouble, and she is so good about prayer, and she and I share the same core beliefs. We could talk about the fundamentals of the Christian faith without ever having a diversion to where it's like, okay, now you just said something that's crazy. I admire the strength of her faith and character. And, of course, I recently interviewed Ralph Sarchi, and he's got that strong strength of faith and character, and he turns to Jesus Christ in absolutely everything. Now, where we're going to come to the crossroads is where, especially when it comes to Marian, where if the Marian thing crosses into worship, there are different opinions that even amongst Catholics about the role of Mary. Some see her as a mediatrix. Some people see her as a co-redemptrix. Some people just see her as a saint that they use as an intercessor. Whatever the case is. The point is the fact that they have that addition onto their theology enough for me to say that you crossed the line into crazy town and now you are going to enjoy burning in hell? I can't really do that. Even if the strength of my disagreement is strong, I can't do that.
And isn't it great that it's not our job?
Exactly.
That's what I say when people go
That's
a little too far. I'm sure glad it's not my job to decide who gets in and who doesn't.
absolutely. And I think I posted a little bit about this in the discussion group, and now I'm going to quote it horribly, but Dr. Heiser had a wonderful thing that he had. There was an interview he did with Skeptico some time back, and the question of, whether or not Catholics or people of varying interpretive stances on theologically would be saved. And his answer was just so wonderful, because it was along the lines of, some evangelicals have this way of thinking that it's almost as though they would be offended if a Catholic ended up in heaven next to them. Almost as though they would be offended if it turned out that this other person, that God showed them mercy and grace and allowed them into salvation alongside them. And that if this person truly would be offended by the notion that another person received grace and gained entrance into eternity, into heaven alongside them, that actually says something about that a problem with their spiritual beliefs, and not necessarily the Catholic or fill in the blank other denomination. And I'll put it in the show notes because I didn't quote it extremely well, but that was the thrust.
It was much shorter than that.
Yeah. Actually, it was quite a bit longer. It was like several paragraphs, but it was all like really fancy smart guy talk. And I thought, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to really dumb this down and make it a little more meandering and rambling. But the thrust of the idea for him was that, we shouldn't be so quick to condemn, but that perhaps we should not put so much emphasis on our own omniscience, and that maybe there are things we don't know, and that maybe there are things that we are, oh my gosh, wrong about.
Oh.
And if that's the case, that's okay. Our God is far more merciful and loving than we happen to be toward one another.
Boy, isn't that the truth?
Mm-hmm.
It really is.
Mm-hmm. And then when we'll take this a step further, which was the other direction that I wanted to take this discussion into, was when it comes to outright non-believers. People who are more of the world, people who are more, whether they're atheist or whether they just don't have any type of spirituality, but they're open to whatever. Maybe they're pantheists, maybe they're New Agers, maybe they're whatever. Or maybe they socially do things that are things that we don't agree with. Basil and Gons over at Canary Cry Radio just recently released what they're calling the gay episode of Canary Cry Radio, and I thought it was really bold. I thought that, it's something where, there was one person who commented on the Canary Cry Facebook page that said, I'm not even going to listen to this episode because it had the word gay in it. That's as far as they knew. Is the gay, I don't want anything to do with it.
I bet that proves the point of whatever the show was about.
Yeah, pretty much. And I'm not going to say that they had a couple guests on, and I'm not going to say I necessarily agreed with everything that their guests said, but the fact that Basil and Gons took that bold step of going in a direction that sometimes can be the kiss of death amongst Christians, like you showed compassion to a gay person, well, clearly you think that homosexuality is A-okay and that we should all engage in it, you're obviously down with the gay agenda. But that wasn't the point of their show at all. The point of their show was that perhaps Christians gain more souls for the kingdom when they are showing compassion toward those who are off track. When they are, rather than saying, you're not welcome here, they view people as maybe these are the ones who need to be welcomed even more so. Maybe, we should make a scooch over and let them sit in the pew next to us. Maybe they need to hear the word too, rather than just being told, we want nothing to do with you because of the way you live your life. And I think that was a really worthy discussion to have, because I think Christians do tend to be very exclusivist and very, you don't live your life right, therefore I want nothing to do with you. Really, that seems to be contrary to what we're told to do.
Well, they pick and hunt and peck for that verses that support that. You're not supposed to be not of the world, be in the world, not of it, and separate yourself. But we're also supposed to salt and light. What we're supposed to be doing. So we're supposed to be out there in it. And where did Jesus hang out? Right.
He was with the thieves and the prostitutes, and he broke bread with them. And he obviously said that those that are well have no need of a physician, and he came for the sick.
Mm-hmm.
But it goes to the idea. It goes to the notion that Christians, by their own behavior, set up this sort of paradigm that Christianity is an unappealing lifestyle. What can we do about this? As Christians, what can we do about this sort of perception that the world has of us, or should we care?
Oh, I think we should care.
Yeah.
Definitely, because they're right.
Right.
What we need to do is show grace to one another.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty simple. Simply said, not simply done.
That's true. Because sometimes when it comes to, how do I distinguish whether I'm showing love or I'm showing acceptance? And I mean that in the sense of, if there's somebody who is living in a very willfully sinful way, how do I show them that I have love and compassion for them without making it come across as though I am accepting of the sort of wrong way of living that they're engaged in?
I guess that's what people are afraid of, that if you're nice to them, then you're accepting what they do.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't think that that's the case. I think people need to quit worrying about that all so much. Don't worry about it. God says we're supposed to love them. You take the opportunity. I mean, there's ways of obviously taking the opportunities that are granted to deal with certain issues.
Mm-hmm.
You can probably draw some, depending on what the issue is and what the relationship in the family or the friends are. I suppose there are some lines that you can draw. But I really think you have to be Spirit-led on those things.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to trust in your relationship with God and what you feel is appropriate at the time. Because some of those, you make the wrong choice and you'll lose family members and you'll lose the potential forever sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's true. And I think that sometimes when we're talking about being afraid, and this is another thing that you and I have spoken about privately recently, is, are we afraid of our own making God angry with us, or are we afraid of our fellow Christians? Now, I've recently fully admitted that there are times where I'm afraid of Christians. I'm afraid of the judgment. Mm-hmm. I'm afraid of even just going into a show like this. Sometimes there is trepidation because, am I going to say something that's going to piss somebody off? Am I going to get the strong dislike mail? Am I venturing into territory where I am going to alienate my brothers and sisters in Christ? And I spend probably an inordinate amount of time being more concerned about whether or not I'm going to upset a fellow Christian than I am worried about whether I'm going to upset a non-believer. I can sit and have a conversation with an atheist or a New Ager or an agnostic, and I'm not afraid of them at all. But I can engage in conversations with Christians, and I'm nervous. I'm anxious sometimes. That's really unfortunate, I think.
Yeah, it is. Well, it's just that it's self-righteousness, man. And most of that is just people being so sure that they got the right answer on every little thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they're willing to fight for it, and it's just not, rather than just discussing it. I mean, you certainly can fight for your ideas, but not in a way of condemnation. We're supposed to reason together. So yeah, defend your belief system, and I'll defend mine, and let's see where it goes from there, and be willing to consider another viewpoint.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that is where we can kind of start wrapping this first episode of the podcast up. I think we covered a lot of ground. We are coming doggone close to the 3-hour mark on this episode. And what I would invite those who are listening to do is not only tell us what you thought of the episode in terms of how long it was, the format, things like that, but also I really would love for people to jump in on the discussion. Tell us where we're right, where we're wrong, what your opinions are we off track, are we on track, whatever. Share with us your thoughts on the topics that have come up, because I think that's a big part of why we wanted to do this show in the first place.
Yeah, we could have mailbag if we have good mail.
But I want to thank my wonderful, beautiful, and talented friend Diana for joining me on episode 1 of the podcast. And if you have something that you would like for us to discuss on the next episode of the podcast, I think right now, because maybe we'll have to set up a dedicated email just for this show. But for now, you can just use the contact form on Beyond Extraordinary, and I'll put a addition in the drop-down menu for the podcast at Extraordinary. Okay, so the website is extraordinaryintelligence.com, not Beyond Extraordinary. So go to extraordinaryintelligence.com. Look for where it says contact us. There will be an option in the drop-down menu that says the podcast, and that's where you can send all of your concerns. And then as we go forward, we'll probably set up a Facebook page and a dedicated email and all of that jazz. So one thing that Diana thought would be really, really fun is going forward, because we want this show to be kind of participatory, we want people to engage with the show and with the topics discussed. We thought it would be really fun to have the audience, open it up for the audience of listeners to suggest topics for us to discuss. And then what we would do is maybe put all of these suggestions in like a hat, or a motorcycle helmet, or some other, maybe a pot or a pan, and shake it around, and then just during the episodes randomly draw out the different topics and just discuss them. Because in some ways, it's kind of fun to just sort of discuss things off the cuff. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes.
Yeah. So what we want everyone to do is just send in their suggestions. Nothing's off the table. Do your worst.
Oh boy.
Maybe within reason. But send us your discussion topics. We'll put them in a little hat, and then for our next episode, while we're recording, we will just draw some topics out of the hat and see if we can, get a good discussion going on the topics that you suggest to us. So, as I said, please go to the contact form at extraordinaryintelligence.com. Go to the drop-down where you will see where it says the podcast, and send us your suggestions for the next episode. Anything else you want to add, Diana?
Oh, I don't think so. I think we talked a lot.
I think we did too. That's gonna be the tagline. That'll be our motto. We talked a lot. And would you expect any less? Well, on behalf of Diana, I will just say thank you for listening. Have a wonderful night, and God bless.